"We don't need dissent in God's house," Pastor Coleman said, his voice steady as he stared at the empty pulpit. "You've become more of a threat than a blessing." That's when I knew. He had no idea what I had kept tucked away. No sermons. No shouting. Just silence. And receipts. My name is Eli Thompson, 39 years old, and for the better part of 11 years, I was the guy no one clapped for at First Redeemer Church, but the one who kept the whole thing from falling apart. I wasn't up on the altar. I wasn't on stage leading songs or shaking hands after service. I was the one arriving before sunrise, unlocking doors, balancing accounts, fixing printers, setting up chairs. I didn't have a title people remembered. But when something broke, they called me. People think church runs on faith. Truth is, it runs on systems. And I built most of them. I kept every receipt, filed every form, cleaned up messes nobody ever saw. But when you're quiet, when you don't beg for attention, people stop noticing you're the one holding the roof up. And eventually, they forget to thank you before they let it fall on your head. For years, I sacrificed weekends with my wife, my son's soccer games, even my mother's memorial service, just to keep things on schedule. Pastor Coleman would always say, "The Lord honors those who serve in silence." So, I served. I stayed quiet, until I started noticing things. That made me not so sure he was the only one watching. I joined First Redeemer back when it was still meeting in a rented middle school cafeteria. Just 30 folding chairs, a donated keyboard, and a pastor with big dreams. Back then, it felt like a family, messy, flawed, but sincere. Pastor Coleman preached about service, about purpose, and I bought in completely. Not just with my tithe, but with time, energy, ideas. I helped us set up our first real office, built the financial system from a shoebox of receipts to cloud-based records. I didn't just count the donations, I structured the accounts, handled permits, negotiated leases. When we moved into the new building, it was my name on the contractor documents because no one else wanted to deal with the paperwork. And slowly, as the pews filled and the donations multiplied, something shifted. It stopped feeling like a family and started feeling like a brand. Suits replaced sincerity. Titles became more important than trust. And Pastor Coleman, he stopped looking at me like a partner and started looking through me like staff. It started subtle, the kind of shifts only someone like me would notice. Budget meetings I used to lead became invite-only Zooms I wasn't CC'd on. Pastoral staff began whispering about fresh ideas and next-gen leadership during breaks. They hired an outside consultant to modernize operations, and I watched him fumble through reports I built from scratch. He never asked me a single question. Then came the real signs. My access to the donation platform was downgraded without explanation. Files I maintained disappeared from the shared drive. And the cherry on top? A 22-year-old intern named Caleb was suddenly assisting with financial oversight. I'd trained accountants older than him. One morning, I found him sitting at my desk, logging into the church's account system. "Pastor said I should start getting familiar with the numbers," he said without even looking up. I just nodded and walked out. I didn't argue, I didn't fight, because by then I'd already backed up everything. Pastor Coleman stopped making eye contact in staff meetings. When I shared concerns about donation mismanagement, specific figures, line, items, he brushed them off like I was reciting conspiracy theories. "Don't be rigid, Eli," he'd say. "This is a season of expansion." But I saw the truth. I was being pushed out, one quiet step at a time. And the worst part, everyone else just went along with it. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were too comfortable. Or maybe they didn't care. Either way, the writing was on the wall. But what they didn't know, couldn't even imagine, was that I was the one holding the pen. The calls started coming 2 weeks after I stopped showing up. Not from Pastor Coleman, of course. He had too much pride for that. It was Deacon Morris first, then April, the administrator. "Just wondering if you might have the updated donor reports," she said, pretending it was a casual ask. I told her I was no longer part of church operations, but wished her all the best. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't delete the emails. I just didn't answer. They needed me, and suddenly no one remembered how anything worked. Donations weren't reconciling. Online giving stopped syncing. And that flashy new intern, he'd accidentally deleted an entire quarter's worth of records trying to optimize storage. Pastor sent me a text. Short, cold. "If you have any remaining files, please forward them immediately." I didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of principle. They chose to erase me, so I let them feel what that really meant. Meanwhile, I watched, from a distance, as panic quietly replaced the polished smiles. The church's newsletter stopped going out. The audit they tried to rush through flagged for incomplete documentation. The accountant they brought in, gone in 6 days. I heard she cried in the parking lot after her first finance meeting. But I didn't gloat. I didn't laugh. I sat in my small home office, sipping black coffee, watching the chaos unfold like a storm I'd predicted a long time ago. They thought they were cleaning house. They had no idea they'd removed the foundation. The email came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Marcus Bell, a former board member who'd left First Redeemer 5 years earlier, right after Coleman consolidated his control. "Eli," it read, "I've been hearing what's happening. Some of us are building something new. We could use someone who actually knows how to keep things running." I read it twice, then a third time, and for the first time in weeks, felt something break through the stillness. Not anger, not relief, direction. We met that Friday at a small cafe off the highway. Marcus wasn't alone. With him were 2 others I'd worked with years ago. Solid people, real community. Leaders, all quietly pushed aside when the church's priorities shifted from service to image. They weren't just building another church. They were building something better. A nonprofit with outreach, real-world impact, and no megaphone leadership. And they wanted me to oversee operations. "No sermons?" I asked, half-joking. "Only actions," Marcus said. "We're done playing dress-up." The following Monday, I formally accepted. Not with a press release, not with fanfare, just a quiet contract and a new key. That same day, Pastor Coleman called. Yes, called. I let it ring. Then came the text. "I understand you've been speaking with former members. Please refrain from sharing any internal data." I didn't reply, but that night I checked my cloud storage. Every document was still there, untouched, time-stamped, and perfectly legal. The accounts I'd set up in my name, still active. The building lease Pastor never read? Technically under my LLC. It had been his idea. For tax reasons, he'd once said. I didn't need to expose him. I didn't need revenge. All I needed was to let reality do what it does best. Reveal truth over time. Within days of my quiet departure, donations to First Redeemer dropped by 42%. Emails from longtime donors bounced back unanswered. The board, which had once rubber-stamped every flashy vision project, started asking questions. A few even reached out to me, confused, some angry, some ashamed. I didn't badmouth anyone. I simply said, "I'm where I'm supposed to be." Meanwhile, the new organization I joined? We launched our food program 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Local families were already signing up for financial literacy workshops I helped design. And for the first time in a long while, I'd come home at night tired, but proud. One night, as I locked up our modest new office, my phone buzzed again. "You was a private number," I answered. It was Coleman. "Eli," he started, voice flat. "We need to talk. There's some confusion with the lease, and we might need your assistance sorting it out." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even smile. simply said, "I'm not your staff anymore, Pastor." Then I hung up. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was slow, clumsy, and exactly the kind that hurts the most, the kind that can't be blamed on a single moment, but on 1,000 ignored warnings. Within 3 months, First Redeemer lost nearly half its core staff. April left without notice. Deacon Morris resigned midweek, citing ethical misalignment. The flashy intern, gone. The finance system, frozen, literally. They couldn't access their own accounts because no one had bothered to transfer ownership from the temporary LLC Coleman set up under my name. He tried to play it off as a technical hiccup during Sunday service, but even the loyal ones started whispering. Tithes dropped, volunteers stopped showing up. The sanctuary, once packed, echoed with awkward silence. Then came the legal letters. Not from me. From banks, from vendors, from community partners, who wanted nothing to do with a church under investigation for financial inconsistencies. I never lifted a finger, never filed a single complaint. I didn't have to. Coleman tried reaching out through back channels, other pastors, mutual acquaintances, even my cousin. He hinted at lawsuits, at reputational damage, at ungratefulness. Said he'd expose me for sabotage. But the truth? He was the only one panicking. I was just living. He never imagined the quiet accountant would leave with the keys to the entire operation, because men like him confuse silence with weakness. They forget that still water doesn't mean shallow. It means deep, deeper than they're prepared to go. One of the elders, an older woman named Sister Rebecca, called me one morning. I hadn't heard from her in years. She just said, "Eli, thank you. I don't know everything that happened, but I know you didn't deserve what they did." I just said, "It's okay." And it was, because justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly and locks the door behind it. The truth came out by accident, the way most secrets do. A forwarded email, a forgotten PDF, a staffer who didn't realize their inbox was still synced to the church server. April, the former admin, sent it to me one night. No subject line, just a single sentence. Thought, "You should see this." Attached was a scanned document, a board memo drafted months before my removal. It outlined restructuring plans to consolidate authority, remove redundant staff, and bring all financial operations under pastoral control. My name was listed as the first redundancy. Next to it, in Coleman's handwriting, was one word: too methodical. That's when I understood. This hadn't been about budget cuts or modernizing systems. It was about control. My refusal to blur numbers, to funnel funds without paper trails, to approve vanity projects without accountability, all of it had made me the enemy. I wasn't just collateral, I was the obstacle, and they hadn't just pushed me out. They'd plotted it, coordinated it, layer by layer. What Coleman didn't count on was how many people were tired of the charade. April, Morris, even Sister Rebecca. They all came forward. Quietly, respectfully. Each with documents, screenshots, memos. None of them wanted revenge, just truth. We compiled everything. A quiet folder shared with the right people. The nonprofit, board, a few community leaders, and yes, eventually, the authorities. But we didn't leak it. We didn't make noise. We let the story speak for itself, and when the board of First Redeemer finally convened an emergency session, they didn't do it at the church. They held it at a neutral office downtown. That's how far things had fallen. When it was over, word got out. Pastor Coleman was taking a sabbatical. No farewell service, no applause, just silence. I didn't attend the meeting. I didn't have to. Instead, I sat at our new outreach center, watching volunteers distribute fresh food and clothes to families in need, people who didn't care about titles, people who didn't ask for sermons, people who just needed help. One of them, a teenage girl in a hoodie, looked up and said, "Are you the guy who started this?" I paused, smiled. "Not really," I said. "I'm just someone who finally stopped saying yes to the wrong people." Starting over wasn't glamorous. There were no stained glass windows, no choir robes, no stage lights, just a converted rec center, a few fold-out tables, and a handful of people who still believed that community meant more than charisma. But for the first time in years, I could breathe. We didn't call it a church. We called it what it was: a community resource hub. No pulpit, no hierarchy, just a rotating team of folks who took turns leading, serving, organizing. I managed the logistics, but we all carried the weight. In that space, something beautiful happened. The same people once dismissed as too old-fashioned, too methodical, or too soft-spoken became the foundation. Morris ran mentorship, groups for young fathers. April handled outreach programs for women rebuilding after abuse. Rebecca organized meals for the elderly. No one needed titles, they just showed up. We partnered with food banks, local schools, shelters. Every dollar was accounted for. Every meeting ended with action steps. And every decision was made in the open, because transparency wasn't a strategy. It was the new standard. It didn't take long for word to spread. People who'd quietly left First Redeemer began showing up. Not all at once, just one or two, at a time. Curious, guarded. Some were angry, some embarrassed. We didn't judge. We didn't ask why they came. We just asked how they wanted to help. That was the shift. This time, I wasn't building something to prove a point. I was building because it needed to exist, because people needed it, and because, deep down, I needed it too. One night I stayed late cleaning up after a community dinner. The place was quiet, just me and the smell of warm bread still hanging in the air. Morris walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You ever think you'd end up back here?" he asked, sitting beside me. "Not like this," I said, "but this feels more right than anything I've done before." He nodded. "Funny thing is, they tried to erase you. All they did was remind people why they trusted you in the first place." That stuck with me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, but better, stronger. Not from ego, but from principle. We made mistakes, sure. We had setbacks. But every win felt earned. Every moment felt clean. Respect didn't come from what we said. It came from how we showed up. Over and over, without spectacle, without performance. They used to say I was too methodical. Turns out method is exactly what they needed all along. The invitation came by mail. Thick envelope, embossed logo. No return address, just a clean, heavy card inside. "You are formally invited to join the Citywide Council on Faith and Community Leadership." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Turns out it wasn't. The council had been formed by a coalition of nonprofits, interfaith leaders, and city officials looking to streamline support services across the region. They'd seen our numbers, heard about the outreach center, about the food programs, the mentoring, the consistency, and they wanted me, to help design how it all integrated. I sat with the letter in silence. A few years ago, I would have laughed at the irony. Now I just felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't a second chance at status. It was something more dangerous, a chance to define the rules. Marcus was the first person I told. We sat on the back steps of the center after hours, sipping lukewarm tea. He just listened, then said, "If you go in with your terms, or not at all." So I did. At the first council meeting, I didn't speak much. I listened, watched, the same old games unfold. Buzzwords, deflection, performative concern. When it was my turn, I stood up, adjusted my sleeves, and said one thing: transparency isn't a concept. It's a contract. If we want to help people, we have to start by being honest about where the help isn't happening. It landed like a brick in a prayer circle, but it worked. Within months, we built a system. Open budgeting, shared resources, unified reporting. I wasn't there to dominate. I was there to design something that outlived all of us. And that's when Pastor Coleman's name resurfaced, not through the church, through a proposal. He'd started a new initiative and was applying for partnership under a different name. Same style, same branding, but something in the paperwork didn't sit right. I read the submission once, then again, and I flagged it, not because of spite, because the numbers didn't add up. The board asked if I had a conflict of interest. I said no. I had a responsibility. The proposal was pulled, and just like that, the circle closed. They offered me the chair position that same month. I said I'd consider it. Under one condition. No nameplates, no spotlight. We lead by doing. They agreed. Funny thing about power. When you stop chasing it, people start asking you to hold it. I walked back into the building on a rainy Tuesday. Same foyer, same carpet, same flickering light near the stairwell that I used to report every month. Still broken. First Redeemer looked the same, but it felt hollow now. Not just in attendance. In spirit, I wasn't there for a service. I wasn't there to confront anyone. I was there on business. The city had partnered with our outreach network to repurpose underused facilities for community care, and First Redeemer, now struggling to stay afloat, had quietly submitted their space for consideration. The irony didn't escape me. April met me at the door, clipboard in hand. She offered a faint smile. Part apology, part respect. "Funny how things turn around," she said. I nodded. We walked the halls I once maintained, pointing out areas that could be converted. The old youth room into a free clinic, the kitchen into a community cafe, the back offices into financial literacy classrooms. Pastor Coleman wasn't there. He'd stepped back completely, I was told. Word was he'd moved to a smaller town, trying to start fresh. I felt nothing when I heard that. No glee, no bitterness, just closure. As I stepped into what used to be my office, I paused. It was empty now, stripped down to bare walls and old carpet, but the air felt still, clean. Marcus joined me as we wrapped up the inspection. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Familiar," I said, "but this time, I'm just passing through." We approved the space under a new name, with a new mission. No mention of the past. No credit demanded, but everyone in that room knew. They knew who had built it once and who was quietly building again. I never wanted a statue, never needed applause. But what I did want, what I still want, is to leave something that doesn't vanish the moment I stop showing up. So I started teaching. Every Wednesday evening, I sit with a handful of young leaders, some from churches, some from nonprofits, a few just figuring life out, and I walk them through what no pulpit ever taught: how to lead without controlling, how to serve without needing to be seen, how to stay clean when the room gets dirty. I tell them, never confuse silence with weakness, and never let your principles be negotiable. They listen, they ask questions, they challenge me, and I welcome it. Because the goal isn't to build followers, it's to build people who don't need me. That's the legacy I want. And I've only just started. Turns out, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need revenge to win. You just need to stay standing when the dust settles, and let your work speak louder than they ever did.